Hello everyone, today I'm joined by Milos, who actually runs a YouTube channel called Wanax TV. And so how are you doing today?
Well, thanks for having me. I'm glad to be here. How are you?
I'm doing pretty good myself. So obviously like you've been running the YouTube channel and like I've seen a lot of your videos. They're actually really good, honestly. I like them.
All right, perfect. Well, I'm glad to hear that. Yeah, the channel has started in beginning. I think it was January 2020 that I put the first video on. So yeah, uh, the general topic of the channel, so to say, the general focus is ancient Greece, but I do cover different interesting topics in ancient history. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Obviously I think it's mostly like Hellenistic like culture, basically, right? Like
Yeah, so Hellenistic culture is what happened after um, Alexander the Great, obviously,
yeah,
uh, conquered much of the known world. But before him, I would say Minoan civilization was where it kind of all started in the Bronze Age. Then we
yeah,
had the Mycenaeans, and then Hellenic cult. That's basically the beginnings of the Hellenic culture,
yeah.
and Hellenistic culture would be the continuation of that.
Okay. So obviously you touch upon like the Minoan like civilization.
Yeah.
Would you say that's like one of your more like favorite civilizations to study upon?
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, so the Minoan civilization was based on the island of Crete.
Yeah,
Um, they were the first European civilization that developed to the stage that we consider civilization.
yeah,
Obviously, in the Aegean, we have the Cycladic or Cycladic culture in the Aegean Islands, but it was the Minoan Cretans that obviously started. They introduced the writing system called Linear A, which is
okay,
unfortunately undeciphered to this day, but they were pretty much where it all started. And after that, we had the Mycenaeans who used that same linear A writing script to develop their own writing script, linear B, which is the first recorded Greek language. The earliest recorded Greek language is the what the
yeah,
Mycenaeans spoke and what was recorded on what was originally developed from the Minoan writing system.
okay. So obviously, like you said, it's obviously very much different from like the Greek language that we know today, right? I mean, it's like the ancient version, like it's ancient, like it's even more ancient than like ancient Greek, basically.
Yeah, you're right. They were basically the ancient Greeks to the ancient Greeks, right?
Yeah,
So I would say, I believe about 800 BC was where the Greek alphabet was developed, based on the Phoenician alphabet. And by the time of Homer and Hesiod, the earliest known writers or poets
yeah,
whose works are written down, the the period that they wrote about, the which correlates to the Mycenaean period, they called it the heroic age, was
okay,
pretty ancient to them already. It was, I believe, 400 years at least have been passed by that time with no literacy in the Greek world. So
yeah,
they were talking about pretty ancient times from their point of view, let alone
okay.
us.
Oh wow. I mean, you mentioned Homer, and like obviously he talks a lot, and I think even in your videos, like you've touched upon like the Trojan War and like Achilles and Hector. You actually go into a lot of great detail that even I didn't even know, like Hector, like whole like family and like how he had like so many brothers.
Yeah, I mean, so what I did in the videos was more or less a story that follows the Iliad
Yeah,
and the so-called the early epic cycle that spoke about the Troy. Much of
yeah,
that works. much of those works are gone now. They survive in fragments or as mentions in the works of the later writers. But
Yeah,
obviously, the Iliad and the Odyssey are the two big ones. They are very very available today. So yeah, I mean, I went through that and basically presented those events described there, which is not necessarily how anything historically happened, but that's how they described it. Uh,
yeah,
Pretty much mixed with mythology. I mean, they have gods directly intervening, Zeus weighing in which side is he going to support. So I kind of put gods to the side and just went through the story as how the Iliad described it. So it's pretty interesting how things develop over time orally,
yeah,
with no right with people not writing stuff down, right? Because
yeah,
we consider that Trojan War was believed to have happened at about 1200 BC, a couple of decades, give or take. And between that and 800 BCE or 750, where the Iliad was written down, it's more than 4 centuries. So with people not being able to write down accounts, subsequently, right after the Trojan War took place, generations and generations contributed to diversions of the actual story, if it's how it happened. We don't know for a fact what happened to the Trojan War. We know that the city of Troy existed. It was destroyed or sacked a couple of times throughout its um, thousands of years of history. And we do know that about 1200 BC, which is what the Iliad talks about, what Homer talks about, we do know that Troy suffered destruction, immense destruction, and that does correlate with the story of the Trojan War that he talks to. So we know that the Trojan War happened, but we don't know in which capacity. We don't know who fought who exactly. There's no direct contemporary historical evidence
yeah,
the way things went down. So that much we know, but it's amazing how throughout the hundreds of years, story changed, and by the time of Homer, we have the abduction of Helen as the main
yeah,
reason why the war itself happened. But if we were to think rationally, that was probably not the case.
yeah. I mean, now, what's funny is we do know like the city of Troy did kind of like actually exist because they
Yeah,
did actually find like the remains and stuff like the archaeological remains. Now, obviously, we don't know like the full story of what actually happened, right?
right.
But do you think there might be a chance that these characters from the Iliad, right, like the Trojan War, like Achilles and Hector and whatnot, like do you think that these people might have actually existed by any chance? Like,
So I mean, from it's impossible to tell really, because
yeah,
there's no direct evidence or proof either way. We don't have evidence of the actual historical names of the rulers and the warriors and warlords that took part in that war in 1200 BC. So we can't say, oh, it was not Achilles, it was this guy. But we can't really say it was Achilles just because Homer says so.
yeah,
So it's very hard for us to say from this point of view. I wish there was some kind of additional evidence that would help us, but what I would presume is that some names are based on the real names that took place in that war, some
Yes.
names are just based on historical people that people at the time already had foggy memory of. So and some names are probably completely made up. That's basically how it
Yeah.
works, not just in ancient Greece, but basically any kind of oral tradition. The further you go without writing it down, the more it's gonna divert from the original facts. The more we're gonna have mythology, different stories surrounded happening that don't necessarily have. For example, the ancient Greeks, by the time they wrote down the Iliad, they made no mentions of the Hittites whatsoever, and we know for a fact that Hittites were very important factor in the Western Asia Minor, and uh, even had treaties with the historical kings of Troy. So, but
Yes.
there's no mention of that because people forgot about their existence over the hundreds of years. They only remember the great Achilles, Agamemnon, Priam, Hector, Trojan War, and probably added a lot of elements to make for a good story for
Yeah.
the classical audience.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. That's actually a good point. Now, I do want to touch upon because you did talk about uh like the Minoan Greeks, and if I'm not mistaken, I think in one of your videos, you were talking about like the Minotaur, right? Was it for that one specifically?
Yeah,
Like
so
this?
I can't remember which video was it because the video was not specifically about the Minotaur. It was one of the videos about the Minoan
Yeah.
civilization that I touched upon the Minotaur story. So we do know that the Minoan civilization was known for the bull frescoes, the sports or ritual activities. We are not sure because their writing system is undeciphered, but we do
Yes.
know that bulls as animals had they were very highly regarded in their culture, and uh, they probably had religious significance. It's hard to
Yeah.
say, obviously, because there's no direct evidence either way, but that's pretty much the scholarly consensus right now. And it's amazing how the Greek mythology, which is not necessarily based on the Minoan civilization, because that was far, far in the past as far as ancient Greeks are concerned. They were barely aware of the ancient, they call them Ethio-Cretans, the true Cretans. So
Okay.
much of their stories are actually based on the Mycenaean times, and when Crete was under the Mycenaeans, which happened in the 15th century BCE, the Minoan civilization ended. The Mycenaeans took over. They
Yeah.
had their capital at Knossos, and from that point on, uh, Crete was Mycenaean and later ancient Greek. So it is amazing how they still did preserve that importance of a bull as a sacred animal over there, and that even the myths sprung about the Minotaur, half human, half bull, which was
Yeah.
uh, uh, you know this story how they were
Yeah.
sacrificing the Athenian youth, and then the great hero Theseus comes, defeats the Minotaur, etc., etc.
Yeah.
It's one of the traits of the ancient past that still stood in their memory, the bulls. So it even after the Minoan civilization fell, it was still an important element of their culture.
Yeah. What's actually interesting is I kind of know that um that like during that time obviously and even like nowadays like there's a lot of earthquakes in that region, and one of the reasons that they would say I guess like the earthquakes were a resemblance of the Minotaur like roaring, and like basically that was the reason why, and then they kind of like ascribed the earthquakes to the Minotaur.
Yes, so I know that hypothesis.
Yeah,
And also, we do know that there was a Thera eruption. We
yeah,
still don't. There's a slight difference in radiocarbon dating and the archaeological evidence, but it is generally dated to about between 15 and 1600 BCE, which was at the time the Minoan civilization was at its peak.
yeah,
So it is believed that the Thera eruption, which is now there are many theories about to which degree it contributed in weakening the Minoan civilization, but it is generally believed that it's one of the factors that Minoan civilization went downhill and enabled the Mycenaeans to just come and take over the whole island.
yeah. Now, obviously, I think you mentioned the Mycenaeans, and I remember in one of your videos, like you were talking about like the religion of the Mycenaean Greeks, right?
Yeah.
And what's actually kind of interesting is like not all of the Greek gods that we know today were in it like originally, right?
Oh, you mean there were different peoples, different groups that inhabited the area
Yeah.
of Greece at the time of the Mycenaeans?
Oh no, no, no. I'm talking about like the religion of the Mycenaean Greeks.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, I think in the original, if I'm not mistaken here, I think you said that there wasn't like Zeus originally. I think
Oh,
wasn't
yeah.
in Greek.
Yeah, I know what you mean. So,
Yeah,
so originally it is believed that it was actually Poseidon that was
yeah,
the chief god. So now we don't know the exact relations that the Mycenaeans had with their gods, uh,
yeah,
just because of the absence. They use their text just for accounting and evidence and palatial records. So
yeah,
we have a blurry, scarce picture of how everything looked, but it does appear that Poseidon was the chief god of the Mycenaean religion, which is, I guess, a very early version of ancient Greek religion. Obviously, Zeus was still there. There were records of that mention Zeus as well. He was the
yeah,
sky god, but he was not. Um, I would say, as prominent or as prominently featured in the records as Poseidon
yeah,
was. And Poseidon was also apparently um, connected to ruling the underworld, which we do know that in the ancient Greek religion, Hades is the god of the underworld. So
yeah,
it is very possible that uh, Poseidon had many more attributes than just being a god of the sea back in the
yeah,
Mycenaean times.
yeah. Because I do know that like Zeus, like he kind of like hails from like the idea of like Skyfather, right? Which is even prominent in other like religions, right? Like India,
Yeah,
if I'm not
yeah,
mistaken. Yeah,
yeah. I mean, the thing with the Mycenaean, I'm sorry, with the ancient Greek gods is Zeus is obviously, he's the king of the gods, he's ruler of Olympus. But even in Greek mythology, he's not presented as an all-knowing sky father that is aware of everybody
yeah,
and everything. There are other gods that sometimes they trick him, sometimes they do stuff behind his back. So he
yeah,
does have, he reacts to that. There, I suppose, emotions
yeah,
there as well. There's element he does exercise revenge. He's not. Uh, I wouldn't say that he's equivalent to let's say um, a modern day god, what people consider, for
yeah,
example,
yeah. I think
in,
the Greek
in
gods are more
Egypt.
like human than they are like I guess like all-knowing God, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, exactly. They had human features, I would say, I
yes,
guess, so that the Greeks would be um, aware of. I would say it. the gods were not necessarily morally superior to humans in all accounts of
Yeah,
what went down in Greek mythology. They were obviously doing some terrible stuff too. So definitely
yeah,
not equivalent to an all-knowing, all-powerful sky father, I would say. I mean,
yeah, yeah. No, that's true. Now, I do remember. I think it was. Let me try and remember. I think it was the Denoans, right? I think are they from that same region or
Minoans?
I don't know. I think it's Denoans. Denoans.
Oh, Danaans?
Oh, Danaans. Yeah, there you go. Yeah, Danaans.
Danaans. So that's an interesting um thing that we interesting case that we have is that in Homer in the Iliad he
Yeah.
for the Greeks that took part in the Trojan War he doesn't use the word Greeks, he doesn't use the word Hellenes, although he
Oh,
does use it like once or twice, but he chiefly uses three terms to describe Greeks. Those are the
okay.
Achaeans, the Danaans, and the Argives. So those three
Okay.
are synonymous. He uses it depending on whether or not the specific word fits in his style of poetry. Uh, so um, so we do have a conclusion based on that, chiefly based on that. There are a couple of other things, and then later ancient Greek historians they built up on that. They built their own theories, but the Neans were basically representing the Mycenaean Greeks, more or less. They
Okay.
were one of the names used for Mycenaean Greeks. When you say Danaans or Achaeans, that basically means the same thing, which is the Mycenaean Greeks.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, I just wanted to make sure because I remember in one of your videos, you touched upon like how they actually had like a delegation with one of the ancient pharaoh, like Tutmos the third.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
actually,
Thutmose the third, he was obviously a great pharaoh, great conqueror
yeah,
in Egypt, and he was waging wars against the Mitanni kingdom
yeah,
in the Middle East, which is situated basically somewhere between Upper Mesopotamian region
yeah,
slash Eastern Anatolia,
yeah,
and they were the chief power at the time during the Bronze Age when Thutmose waged an attack on them. Actually, he waged an attack on the Mitanni allied kingdoms in the Canaan first, and then went upwards. And when he emerged victorious and he took some of those territories, put them under the Egyptian sway, he did record a delegation from the land of Tanayu um, arriving and giving him gifts. And
oh,
there's an evidence of what they gave him. I believe
yeah,
some cups, or it
yeah,
doesn't really matter. But and so he mentions the delegation of the king of Tanayu. That's what he
yeah,
says. So that's very similar, Tanaya to Denea, which would be the land of the Denaeans. So which is synonymous with the Mycenaean Greeks, right? And then we
yeah,
also have a Hittite, I'm sorry, an Egyptian record, which is more about geography than it is about history, where they record basically which city belongs to which kingdom or which land. Um, and they do mention the land of Tanayu, and they mentioned Mycenae as one of the chief cities in that land. So obviously they referred to the Mycenaean Greece with their wording Tanayu in ancient Egypt. Obviously
oh,
the Hittites they used a different term. They used Ahia, or that was in the earlier Hittite language. In the later Hittite language, that evolved in Ahiawa. both words synonymous, and they refer to the Achaea, which is, the land of the Achaeans. They refer to the Achaeans, obviously the Mycenaean Greece. So now there's obviously we don't know why Panaya, Achaea, Danaans, Achaeans, why that those different words existed. We don't
Yeah,
know that. There are ancient Greek theories about why was that the case. For example, there is a story when King Danaeus, obviously from Greek mythology, he made a law in Greece that what was named the Pelasgians, or all the inhabitants of the land, were now to be called Danaans by law. So and Argives, which is synonymous with Danaans and Achaeans, are used to describe that population as well. Um, so we still don't know why multiple synonymous words supposedly describing the very same people existed. It's hard to
yeah.
tell.
No, that makes sense. So, because I actually did like an episode earlier with like famous Egyptologists, like in my previous episode, and in that episode I did mention how Moses the Third, he was actually one of the first Egyptians to actually record like the kill count of how many people he actually
Yeah.
like actually killed in battle. So I guess it doesn't really surprise me that he would actually record his interaction with like other people, like you said, with the Mycenaean Greeks, obviously using like a different term, but that's actually kind of interesting because I didn't know like the Hittites actually also interacted with them.
Oh, the Hittites have
Yeah,
extensive history with
yeah,
what they called the Ahiawa. I believe that began first when the Mycenaeans spread into the Asia Minor, the coastal
oh
Asia
yeah,
Minor, specifically the city of
yeah,
Miletus. That was their main base of operations in Asia Minor, which happened around the same time they conquered the Minoan Crete. I would say mid to late 15th century BCE, they were already established their presence in Asia Minor. And at the time, the Hittite Empire was also interested in establishing hegemony or furthering their influence in the same area. So they came
yeah,
into conflict. I believe we have the indictment of Maduata. That was the records of a Hittite king where he was complaining basically about a local ruler in Western Asia Minor who switched the allegiance from the Hittites, basically betrayed them and sided with this a certain Atarsia from Ahiawa. That was the first Atarsia from Ahia, actually, in the old Hittite. That was the first mention of the Hittite encounter with the Mycenaean Greeks. I mean, they for sure knew about them from even earlier period, for sure, because they were
yeah,
close to the Egyptians who are far away. They knew about them. Then the Hittites for sure knew about them. So there were. That's actually where the conflict started, and there are records of correspondence between the Hittite and Mycenaean kings in the subsequent centuries, going all the way to the late 13th century BCE, basically all the way till the end, till the Bronze Age collapse. Uh, there was I don't remember which king was it. It was Tudhalia the first, I believe, was the Hittite king that
yeah,
conquered this so-called Assuan League at about 1400 BCE. And what was left from the Assuan League was the kingdom of Arzawa, which was its capital was a city called Apasa, which is, I guess, the Hittite name for Ephesus on the Aegean coast. It was
Okay.
a powerful kingdom in the area, and it was always sponsored and used as a proxy by the Mycenaeans to fight the Hittites. They rarely fought directly, although they did on numerous occasions, but not anywhere near comparable to the amount of the proxy wars with the kingdom of Arzawa, the Troy, the kingdom of Velusa, and a couple of other smaller kingdoms in the area that the Hittites and Mycenaeans frequently use against one another.
Yeah. No, that's true. And it's actually obviously like you touch upon mostly the Bronze Age, right?
Yeah,
And I do know that the collapse of the Bronze Age is mostly due to because you did a video on it too, is due
yeah,
to the sea people as they're referred to.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the sea peoples, they're still a mystery.
Yeah.
There's a list of 9 or 10 or so of the groups constructed by the Egyptians of what we today call the Sea Peoples. They were not originally called the Sea Peoples. The Egyptians just spoke of them as a foreign confederation, foreign countries or foreign lands
Yeah.
that have conspired in their islands, and they destroyed the Hittites, the and the cities on the Levantine coast,
Yeah.
Ugarit, and eventually they were defeated by the Egyptians. But there are indications about some of those groups, about who they were, where they came from. Some of them are still completely unknown, but significant portion of what we consider sea peoples today uh, came from the Aegean Sea area.
Yeah. Yeah, because I do remember in your video you did mention like a lot of different groups of people that are theorized to be like the sea people. I do remember that. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the chiefly, we do know that the Paliset, which the Egyptians constantly mentioned, they ended up uh, settling in the southern Canaan, in a few cities south of Judea or Israel towards the in the Gaza region. And
Yeah.
we do know that they existed. We do know that they have their early pottery, their early architecture does
Yeah.
resemble the Mycenaean culture. They did have
Wow.
Megaron in southern Canaan, where they settled after their conflict with the Egyptians. They did build Megaron, which is feature of the Mycenaean civilization, and they did have
Yeah.
local made pottery that were basically replicas of what the Mycenaeans did at a similar time period. So there's connection there. There's also a connection between some other groups. For example, the the Shekelesh, the Sheridan, although the Sheridan is supposed they are connected to the island of Sardinia, but the bottom line is we don't really know because the Egyptians were the only ones that wrote about them. The only
Yeah.
uh, groups that we do know about it are the Luca, which is Lucia or Lycia, which is mentioned by the Hittites as well. We know who they were.
Yeah.
They were also present in the ancient times and in the classical period. They are no mystery, but many of the other groups are pretty much still a mystery.
Okay. Now, before we end off, do you feel like you have anything else you want to add on to it? Anything else you didn't get a chance to say?
Oh, so I mean, the we chiefly talked about Bronze Age Mycenaean
Yeah.
Greeks, which is what the channel, the Wanax TV channel is about in terms of the topics that we do on the channel. So that's more or less the chief area of my interest.
Yeah.
But overall, the ancient Greek history is really fascinating. I mean, it was the first European civilization and the predecessor of the Romans and the Western civilization that we know
Yeah.
today.
Yeah. Yeah, that was true. I mean, I'm really impressed by all the information that you do know, honestly.
Well, thanks. I mean, I guess when you do so many videos on a certain topic or group of topics, I've done my homework, so I put the research
Yeah,
in. So there's dozens and dozens of hours of research there. So some of this stuff is not uh, is still to be confirmed because the further you go in the past, it gets
yeah,
more difficult to get the actual facts.
yeah,
Especially when it comes to the Trojan War. I mean, we know the
yeah,
basic stuff about it if we were to talk historically, but we don't know much, to be honest. We don't know
yeah,
much. But
yeah.
yeah,
No, that's true. A lot of history in general is surrounded in mystery. It's really hard to uncover, of course. So,
yeah, yeah.
I appreciate you taking the time to, do this podcast episode with me, and and obviously, like, I'm honored to have you. And maybe in the future we can do like another episode if you're down for it. Yeah,
For sure, that's something that we can do again in the future. I'm
yeah,
happy to be here. I'm glad I was here. So thank you.
yeah, yeah. For everyone that enjoyed the episode, please like and subscribe and hit that bell notification. And until next time, peace.